CrossView Radio podcast for Wayne County. I'm John Marino, pastor of CrossView Church in Orville. We exist to glorify God by exalting Christ and magnifying the gospel for the joy of all nations. Well, there is a meme floating around out there that shows a picture of a highly advanced human civilization. It shows flying cars, a prosperous, fruitful, and peaceful planet. And the caption at the bottom of the image says, "Our Earth without religions." Now, as a graduate of government school, I am well acquainted with the view that religion, and Christianity in particular, has been a cancer on society. The modern idea is that civilization has advanced in spite of Christianity, and that Christianity has only slowed the advancement of civilization. It seems to me that this particular view was at its peak when Dawkins and his ilk were in their heyday. They represent the height of modernism. Of course, we're living in a postmodern society now. However, modernism told us that science and reason was going to usher in a human utopia, and that it provided all of the answers to everything in life. Our only hope now is to extinguish all religions, especially Christianity, cast off its antiquated superstitions, and move on to greater and greater heights of civility, science, and progress. That's the narrative. And so you can imagine kind of this spectrum, as it were. On the left-hand side, you have barbarianism, and on the right-hand side, you have civility. On the left-hand side, you have superstition, and on the right-hand side, you have wisdom. And the narrative is that the more committed you are to religion, again, particularly Christianity, the farther you are to the left side, and the less committed that you are to religion, and the more committed you are to reason, the farther along you are on the right side. And so Christianity, as the narrative goes, leads you to barbarianism, and reason leads you to civility. The narrative is that reason rescued us out of the superstitious, antiquated world of Christianity, and that these poor, backwards people didn't have an understanding of science, and so they just invented this idea of God to give explanatory power to nature and the universe. They wanted to feel good about things they didn't understand, and so God was just an invention and a coping mechanism to give us hope. Now, I do think, to some degree, that postmodernism has kind of quieted the Dawkins types, and I think this narrative is probably a little bit less pronounced than it was, say, 20 years ago. Nevertheless, there are still many remnants of modernism in modern culture, and I do think that it still is a major problem, major enough to talk about and address at least. One of the reasons to talk about it now is because even though the Dawkins crowd is a little bit quieter, society hasn't gotten closer to the truth or closer to Christianity. If anything, society needs to know that unless we do a course correction, we're actually going to go further and further towards barbarianism. In other words, the narrative is 180 degrees in the wrong direction. It's not that autonomous human reason leads to greater and greater civility. It's that Christianity leads to greater and greater civility. It's not that Christianity leads to greater and greater barbarianism. It's that autonomous human reason leads to greater and greater barbarianism. It's a bold claim, I understand, but actually it's not a bold claim. It's actually a very reasonable claim. It's just that our collective societal memory has been shot. We forgot where we came from. And so I hope in some small way to help us remember that today. Historian and agnostic Tom Holland, no, not the actor Tom Holland, historian and agnostic Tom Holland, wrote a fascinating book entitled Dominion, The Making of the Western Mind. Holland writes a fascinating history of Western civilization in his book. He is, as I said, not a Christian, but he catalogs in fastidious detail how Christianity is responsible for civilizing Western civilization. He says, quote, "To live in a Western country is to live in a society still utterly saturated by Christian concepts and assumptions." Now, that's a pretty remarkable statement, but what's even more remarkable than this and by remarkable, I mean insane, is that Holland goes on to conclude that Christianity has gotten us to this point of civility, but now that we've reached this height and this kind of plateau, it's time to abandon Christianity and to move past it. He sees Christianity more as a useful tool that can now be safely discarded. In any event, Holland describes how Christianity 2,000 years ago was introduced into a barbaric and uncivilized culture. And the result of Christianity over 2,000 years is that it has completely reformed that society. Tom Holland is an agnostic, and I want us to think about his contribution to this conversation in much the same way that the Apostle Paul thought of the contribution that the unbelieving Stoic philosophers had in his sermon. In Paul's Acts 17 sermon to the men of Athens, he quotes two unbelieving Stoic philosophers. He certainly wasn't endorsing these unbelieving philosophers, but they were useful to his cause. He was trying to discredit the Athenian belief that idols were gods, and in order to discredit it, he cited two of their own unbelieving philosophers and said this, as even some of your own poets have said. In other words, Paul was saying, look, even your own authorities reject your premise. And so I would like to use Tom Holland in a similar way. For me, Holland is utilitarian. He is pragmatic to the cause. And I would like to use some of the conclusions that he makes here to say, look, non-believers, even this non-believer gets it. And so here is my premise for this podcast series that we're going to do. I'm calling this podcast series Under the Influence. It's a title I'm borrowing from another book. But the premise is what has society become under the influence of Christianity? And so my premise for the podcast is this. Everything good in Western civilization today is a result of Christianity. Therefore, if we discard Christianity, we will revert back to paganism, barbarianism, and self-destruction. You see, 21st century Western civilization wants the fruit of Christianity without its roots. We want, for example, to live in a high-trust society where you can leave your laptop on the table at the local coffee shop or leave your wallet on the front seat of your car. We want to live in a society where murder and rape are frowned upon. But our society has experienced, again, a memory wipe and no longer remembers that these values actually came from Christianity. They came from Christians who fought for truth over decades and generations. And so you need to know that if we get rid of Christianity, we will lose all of the good that came as a result of Christianity. Society will continue to erode more and more. But in the meantime, and what I would like to do today and next week as well, is I just want to pick kind of one area at a time and just evaluate how Christianity has impacted that particular area. So today, we're going to look at the sanctity of life. And actually, that's all we're going to get to today, probably, because of time here. So we'll look at the sanctity of life, and then we'll continue in other areas, compassion, science, charity, law, all these other areas. But this is a little bit more of an introduction. So let's look at Christianity's impact on the sanctity of life. Christians do talk a lot about this particular topic and how in our culture this value that we hold dearly is quickly eroding. Abortion is rampant. Euthanasia is increasing at an alarming rate. It's becoming more and more socially acceptable. How, by the way, society mourns suicide and not euthanasia boggles my mind. In any event, and in spite of how far we have fallen, the public still regards human life with at least some value. And while there is plenty of room for improvement, what I am interested in, at least for the purposes of today's podcast, is the shock and surprise that our society has any regard for human life at all. Where did that come from? I'm not surprised that our culture is as bad as it is. I am surprised that it isn't worse. What possible explanation could we give for the good that remains? For instance, at present, and for the most part, I know we could talk about exceptions to this, but for the most part, our culture hates the idea of torture, child abandonment, infanticide, human sacrifice, slavery, and suicide. What is interesting to me is how this came to be. And the story about how we came out of pagan barbarianism has Jesus Christ at the center. Take infanticide, for instance. This was part and parcel of the ancient world. The ancient Greek and Roman cultures took it for granted, and they certainly were not repulsed by it. Not only the ancient world, but in many countries even recently, and even today, this is practice. India practiced infanticide until the 19th century. China and Japan practiced infanticide. Brazil and even the Eskimos practiced it. Africa practiced infanticide. And the American Indians practiced infanticide before those bad European Christian settlers put a stop to it. Infanticide was practiced for any number of reasons. A sickly baby would be discarded. Oftentimes, female infants were discarded. Children were killed for economic reasons. But fortunately, Christianity outlawed it. In the West, infanticide was outlawed in 374 by Christian Emperor Valentinian, and then as Christian missionaries spread across the world, they dealt with infanticide wherever they went, either by providing for the unwanted children themselves, say in some kind of an orphanage or foster system, or outlawing the practice by force of law. Now, what is interesting to me, and again, for the purposes of today's podcast, is the reality that people today are generally, though not always, disgusted by the thought of infanticide. It is a repulsive thought, and this thought of repulsion is intuitive. People don't think normally about why infanticide is bad. They just react and hate it immediately as a knee-jerk reaction. That's good to have that knee-jerk reaction, and that's good when a whole society has that knee-jerk reaction. But rarely do people think about why their knee-jerk reactions are right or wrong. They just react. And so my question simply is this: why does Western civilization have a knee-jerk reaction against infanticide? And the reason is because of Christianity. Western civilization has Christianity to thank for that reflex. And my warning to everyone listening to this is that when you remove Christianity, you remove that disgust and you remove that reflex. Case in point, in January 2023, Lindsay Clancy murdered her 3 children. Their ages were 8 months, 3 years, and 5 years. After that, she jumped out of a window attempting to commit suicide, but she only succeeded in becoming paralyzed from the waist down. This case, of course, is disturbing, but it's not unheard of. Women have been guilty of killing their own children in the past, and it's happened since the beginning of time. The reason that this case is unusually disturbing is because of the women coming out in droves to defend Lindsay as the victim. They have donated to her parents' GoFundMe account and have poured out all kinds of support for Lindsay. I think, I haven't kept up with it, but I think it's over $1 million now in that account. The proper response to murder is a tall tree and a short rope. The point that I'm making is that we're going to see more and more of this kind of behavior on a societal level the further away we get from a Christian ethic. And so, in some senses, we are in a transition period of sorts. And what I mean is that some of the former influence of Christianity is still here, but some of it is gone. We have Christianity to thank for our societal conscience that tells us that murder is wrong. We have ourselves to thank for losing that conscience as we run away from Christ as a society. Well, I plan on exploring several more areas that are what they are today because of a Christian influence. Some of them would be compassion, science, charity, and the law. What is it like to live under the influence of Christianity? In short, everything that Christianity touches gets better, and everywhere that Christianity has yet to touch experiences that much more hardship and suffering. And so you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want to erase Christianity, then you must erase its values as well. And I'm afraid that too few people understand that they have become ignorant beneficiaries of Christianity. This is why you are slowly watching the world revert back to paganism. College courses on witchcraft and those kinds of things. More school shootings, more theft, more crime, more distrust. The only hope of our world is not a superhero, a government program, or more surveillance, or better policing. The only hope for our world is the Lord Jesus Christ. He is sufficient. Thanks for listening to CrossView Radio. I'm John Marino, pastor of CrossView Church in Orville. We meet Sundays at 9 a.m. To find out more about CrossView Church, visit us online at crossvieworville.com.